all of the voter suppression that we're dealing with right now is it started after the corrupt bargain of 1876 and the end of Reconstruction. Like they say that the North won the war, but the South won the peace. And a lot of
100%. No doubt about that.
A whole lot of shit that we deal with today is because of the events of not the Civil War, but the Reconstruction after Civil War. And the fact that we lost that is largely because Rutherford B. Hayes.
What up, world? And welcome back to another episode of the AmeriPodcast, episode 147. Today is Friday, May 7th, 2021.
I love Friday.
Yeah.
There is.
Happy Friday, everybody. We've got the original crew in the house with us this evening. And we're gonna, I know it's been a little while since we've dropped by, but we're gonna play another game today, and we're all excited about it, so hope you enjoy it as well. But first, introduce the crew. In reverse today, our West Coast correspondent, Tyler Grillo, out in the Bay Area.
Going first today. Yeah.
How's it going, sir?
Going pretty well. Just, been continuing finishing. I almost put in my grapes, my grapevines, and I'm putting up the trellis. Feeling good. Spring is sprung. I'm sprung because spring is sprung. So.
For everybody, a penis joke on your bingo card. You can go ahead and mark that one.
Right,
you should always have that on your bingo card. Always.
I thought Tyler was referring to his man bun, but
that could be it too. Yep.
Also with us out in the Denver metro area, John Anderson. How are you today, sir?
I'm good. Happy it's Friday. We're gonna play hockey games. We're playing 2 games against Air Force next weekend. I'm fucking pumped. It's gonna be interesting though. We've never played them before. They're a brand new team, so we shall.
Is this your first game?
First game all season. The season's technically over. These are just scrimmages, but it'll be the first 2 games we played. So we're doing a home and home next weekend. It's going to be awesome.
Nice.
Fun times, man. That's great. Glad that they get back out on the ice again.
I'm so glad
actually
my
play other people
get
besides just practices. Brutal.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. We know nothing about them, so here we go.
Start doing your research. Well,
is it going to when you have to do the home down at Air Force, John, is it going to bring back bad memories of that time we did our hockey camp down there?
No, dude, it's going to bring. I love that camp. I was telling a friend some stories about that the other day. So I love that. Listeners, we did an Air Force hockey camp, and there's all these different sports going on at the same time. They all ate lunch in the hockey rink when we were on the ice, and that was one of my favorite things in the world, was having like all those people watching us practice.
True, yeah. Yep, that was fun.
That was great.
We only got in a little bit of trouble.
It's good to perform under those circumstances, with all those people watching you.
Also, shout out to Austin Campbell, who almost got in a fight with an offensive lineman.
That's right.
At the football camp. That was good shit. And then he just like mind ninja'd him like he, would do with other people.
Talked circles around him until he basically, Austin talked circles around him until he was like basically, oh, no, that actually totally makes sense. I shouldn't be angry.
It was awesome.
You're pretty cool.
It was awesome. He was like, you want to go outside? And Austin was like, dude, you're going to eat me. And it was like, you took that as a compliment, but he was actually calling you kind of fat, I think. Shout out to Austin Campbell.
Also with us out in the Denver metro area, Mr. John Kelly. How are you today, sir?
Good. Glad to be back.
Nice to have you. Right. Man of few words. John Anderson created a nice bracket for us, and I'm going to let him describe the rules of the engagement.
Games.
Because this is an audio medium, let me hold up the bracket. So we're going to do a bracket. We are vaguely calling this the, let's say, most important people in American history, most impactful people in American history. And to make it kind of fun, we have split them up. One side of the bracket are what we are calling heroes. The other side of the bracket is what we are calling villains. So we are going to play out the hero side of the bracket and then the villain side of the bracket. And then we're going to have a good old fashioned dark versus light showdown versus Abraham Lincoln and somebody else, I would imagine.
Jumping the gun a bit. Just assuming Lincoln's coming out. Lincoln's the number one seed.
Yeah, let's see how that plays out. Listeners, we also just want to stay up front. There's only 16 slots. These are like relatively popular names in more common U.S. history. Not all of them, but many of them. There are many people on here who we could argue, and maybe we will do round 2. So you can leave us comments to let us know who those are. This could be a more diverse group, but this is just the one we're going with for today, just to get it started, just to get a feel for it, okay? All right.
Yeah, this is version 1. There's no reason we can't do 2, 3, 4, and have the winners face off.
154.
What we're saying is we're really hoping you're going to write in and tell us how angry you are that we, forgot Strom Thurmond or whoever. So please do that. We would really like it. Just don't leave us a 1-star rating. Please.
Strom Thurmond, great or greatest senator?
I mean, he's the only senator that matters, right?
Yeah, touche.
He's he's above greatest. He's the only one I know.
I wanted Ella Baker on there, and she didn't get on there. So we all have ones that we did. So we'll have future rounds.
We'll do this more. Please let us know if you have any themes that you would like us to do, and we'll build out that bracket, or just build us a bracket. I would love that even more.
That would be fun.
John, yeah.
Get it going.
Mr. Anderson loves his brackets. So if you did that, he would be delighted.
There's some order and sense to them, right?
There you go.
So it's vaguely reminiscent of us sitting around in high school ranking different things as we sat around and played video games.
So do you want to run down the two sides, or do you want to just we'll get there as
let's
go?
introduce them as we go. Let's build some suspense, right?
That sounds good.
Sounds good to me.
So I guess we'll start in the top left because we're American English speakers, and why would we not do that? This is the hero side of the bracket. This is number 1 seed and number 1 in our hearts, Abraham Lincoln, versus Benjamin Franklin.
The 8th seed. I'm very disappointed that he had 8th seed.
I mean, who would you replace him with, though?
We don't have to get to that debate, but
I can see an argument for yeah. So could be higher, I guess, but we'll have to see who you would replace him with as we go.
Well, I would also suggest that he might be the highest because there is the rumor that this is my argument. I'm just letting you know I'm voting for Ben Franklin in this round because he really introduced smoking marijuana and taking naked showers to the American people, and I'd say that is very, very impactful on American history. So
that's better than the Land Grant College Act.
Yep.
Yeah.
Marijuana
or the Homestead Act.
Number 1 cash crop in the world.
It's way better than smoking marijuana and taking a shower with your clothes on.
That's right.
Do you think the Confederate States of America would have legalized marijuana before the federal government? Question mark.
Good question.
Well, that's for I don't know if that's this podcast, but that is actually a great question. Yeah.
Yes,
that's for another bracket.
Probably.
Think, yes, the Confederate States would have legalized marijuana before
I think it would be a
federal
different
government.
If they had been able to break away from the Union and form their own government. I mean, they'd still have slaves, but they probably would have legal free weed.
I don't know about that.
I think that they would have probably capitalized on the cash crop of marijuana
that's
itself.
The thing. But the flip side of that is that marijuana makes you be like, I don't know, seems like you're not chill having slaves. So maybe it wouldn't have worked out in our favor.
Well, but that's the thing is, that's the thing is it would bring about maybe it would have been better that way, because it would have fallen apart anyway. Yeah, exactly.
Or we could have just freed the slaves in the 1800s, like Lincoln did.
100%. All right. Well, I'm gonna reel us back into the debate at hand. And Tyler, I like your argument. I also will say that Benjamin Franklin was a cool dude. I'd probably rather hang out with Ben Franklin on just like a party night or something.
I don't know.
He was
like he liked to drink.
as French ambassador. He went to Paris and kind of tore it up.
True.
Became like a celebrity on the streets there because he was kind of a wild child, which is pretty sweet. I do like that. Famous for inventing energy, right? With the lightning and the key.
I mean, I like the fact that he's a scientist, right? Like a legit
100%.
scientific dude with scientific
He almost killed himself with lightning.
Yeah. I mean, he's he's a legit guy. He just also didn't save the Union.
Yeah, deism, man. He's a deist, which is great. And that's why I wanted to get into Lincoln. Lincoln as the first seed is interesting, and also probably legitimate as a first seed overall.
Who else
really
is
hard.
Gonna be?
It's hard to argue against Abraham Lincoln as potentially the most important person in American history, because there would not be a United States today had he not been elected when he was elected. There's a very good chance that the Civil War didn't happen the way that it happened. And there's a very good chance that there would be no Union, or us sitting in Colorado would be in California probably would be part of what ended up being the North, but Colorado may not be. We might be part of the southern states.
Or like some weird, like, borderlands.
Yeah, who knows? Yeah, who knows? But yeah, I mean, overall, obviously, Lincoln was president during probably our most tumultuous time as a nation. So
Ben Franklin did help get French support during the Revolutionary War, which was important. And maybe you can like counter that a little bit, like the existential argument. But then it's like, I mean, no, you're not as important as Lincoln in that story of like saving the Union, even if.
I will say that Benjamin Franklin was the first postmaster general, and if it wasn't for his outstanding organization abilities and his prowess in delivering mail, I don't know if Abraham Lincoln would have had a very good country to run.
Now we're talking. Like,
I love how you're our
defeat the
post
South.
office stand.
Team BS.
Like,
always bring it back to the post office.
You just bring it back to the post office, baby.
It's important.
I love it.
All right, should we vote? Should we vote on this one?
We should vote. We should vote. I vote for Lincoln.
I vote for Lincoln as well.
I vote for Ben Franklin.
I've been Franklin too.
Oh, what the fuck?
We got a tie in the first round.
Oh my
John,
God,
what's the tiebreaker?
This is like, what is it like when George Morris beats fucking Duke or whatever, and you're like, what are we even doing here?
Yeah, flip that penny. All right.
Because
so,
I mean, to explain it, I love Ben Franklin as I love Ben Franklin as a founding father, but he wouldn't even be my first founding father in terms
Not
of
even
ranks.
Close.
So I can't vote for him over Abraham Lincoln.
All right, flip that coin. Obviously, heads is Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah, heads is Abraham Lincoln. I swear to fucking God. I mean, no.
Just what is it?
Blake, what is it?
It's tails.
No, it's not. What is this? I quit. I'm rage quitting.
Okay, well, John said he might flip the table at some point tonight, so we'll see if that happens.
Listen, I don't know. I'm willing to revoke. I'm willing to change my vote because that was a little bit of a.
It's over.
All right,
it's over. The buzzer sounded.
See, this is the problem, everybody. Everyone listening, this is the problem with protest votes. This is the problem.
Yeah, don't do a protest vote because then Trump gets elected.
That's fair. All right, Benjamin Franklin moves on to the semis.
I'm serious though. I'm genuine in my postmaster general statement. So.
Oh, I know, Blake. I know you are.
Let's go to. Let's see if John can not fume through the whole rest of this. Let's go.
You know that emoji
John's favorite is already out. It's already out. That's who he called to win it. So
the emoji where that red guy's head explodes. That's me for the rest of the podcast. Yeah. All right, Frederick Douglass, rank number 2.
Can I just say that's why you never put your favorite first, man?
I mean, it's Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah, I don't think it's a bad seating. He ran up against the buzzsaw, the party animal, the postmaster general that is Ben Franklin. So let's move on.
Frederick Douglass, number 2, ranked number 2 against Ida B. Wells, who was a founding member of the NAACP.
Yep.
So I mean,
pretty
fucking rad. Frederick Douglass is like one of the most accomplished like speakers to the American soul, I guess I would say. Like he is just a major person who told us who we were, I think, in really important ways.
And also, a very, very important person in the movement first abolish slavery and then afterwards, and reconciliation and the growth of what would turn into 20th century America. A very important person in the history of historically black colleges. Very important in terms of the ideal of education as a way to bring up a section of the population. Somewhat hotly contested and debated by other people within that movement at the time. Some people thought he was not radical enough and perhaps bended the knee a little bit too much to the idea of white society and how African Americans should fit into that. And then, Ida B. Wells, good choice. I did not expect her to be on the list when you first sent it out, John, but I think it's a really great choice. Yeah,
Thank
like you said, found one of the founding members of the NAACP, what you might call a kind of proto 20th century feminist too.
Yep.
Very interested in women's rights, very interested in rights of peoples in general. So
Also
it's a tough one. It's a tough one.
Also a journalist, and did a lot of work to doing reforms around like governmental reforms around lynching law, like making lynching to be illegal. Personally, I think that the founding of the NAACP as an organization, like organizing, it's hard to say like which way is like moving someone's soul in a certain way versus organizing. Those are two very important things. It's hard to say.
Well, the abolitionist movement was pretty important in ending slavery too.
Also true. This is a tough one. I don't know.
Yeah, this is tough.
I might say Ida B. Wells, but honestly it's a toss-up for me.
Yeah, I don't know who I'm going to vote for on any of the rest of the bracket.
Nice. It was Lincoln and then it was everybody else in John's mind.
Yeah. Exactly. I don't understand. I mean, like, to me, it's like, you just put Lincoln at number one and then you have the discussion. But anyways, we don't need to go back.
All right, who are we voting for?
Or you rewrite history. Mm-hmm.
Which we just did, and it's insane, and burned down the podcast.
Blake, comments. What's your thoughts?
I mean, as much as I like Frederick Douglass, I just don't feel like he was as monumental to a movement. But maybe I'm wrong in that. So I'd have to say that it's going to be Miss Wells.
I mean, Blake, two straight underdog picks. Like it.
I too am going to vote for Ida B. Wells. I like the argument that the NAACP into the 20th century and its importance. Obviously, abolition very important as well. But voting on the impact to today, I think is
that's how I was feeling.
All right. Well, Kelly? Do you want to throw in, even though Ida B. Wells takes it?
Right, yeah. Since you're voting, I was going to vote for Frederick Douglass, so that's a 3-1 victory for Wells, and very, very well earned.
Bam! All right. Well, we have another upset. Hot damn!
Damn, here we go.
Is this? This is more of a reflection on the seeding process by you, John.
Oh yeah. This is obviously my problem for putting Abraham Lincoln number one. All right, Martin Luther King Jr. Third rank, respectable, coming in strong. Stumbled a couple times in the regular season, but doing all right. And then our girl, Eleanor Roosevelt. First ambassador to the UN. Very, very monumental in the New Deal, dealing with the Great Depression, fighting World War II. Major feminist icon, pretty freaking rad.
Also, a really tough one.
Yeah,
really
I would recommend Doris Kearns Goodwin's biography on the Roosevelts. Also, it's really good. I think it might be called The Roosevelts, but it
sounds
is
right. Yeah,
both about Franklin and Eleanor. Focuses a lot on Eleanor. It's like she gets equal time, and it's really worth reading. And yeah.
It says a good amount, I think, about probably our thought process about the 20th century and what's important here in the 21st, that she makes the list instead of FDR.
Yeah.
Because you were right. is an early feminist icon. I mean, her work on the rights of human beings and civil rights for all peoples is very important. As the first ambassador to the UN, it's a big deal. It's a very big deal in what she stood for.
I think that's a really good point, the UN piece. I think I'm going to vote for MLK simply because I think it's really close, but because now I will hope in a few years maybe we could do this bracket again because I would vote a different way. But if we're talking about like lasting impact, unfortunately, a lot of the things that happened inside of the New Deal have now been stripped away and otherwise refurbished. So unfortunately,
the
I'm
era
going
of
to go.
big government is over, as Democratic President Bill Clinton said.
Yes.
By the way, it's coming back, baby.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. In a couple of years, I might vote differently, but in terms of lasting impact, because people were like, if people realize, oh, remember that? Remember Make America Great? When? Oh, when there was a bunch of socialist policies.
Right in the 50s when everybody was actively getting more money.
When there was like 500 tax brackets all the way up to 90%, and we built the fucking interstate system, and we started the space race and made all of these public investments that we're still reaping the benefits of today. You mean that awesome socialist program we should go back to?
Yeah, maybe that. But But in terms of lasting impact, I mean, just being still in the in the midst of our modern civil rights movement, I'm going to go with MLK. Although, of course, there are many other leaders we could talk about inside of that movement as well.
Exactly, and I know that we had some rumblings about potentially putting Malcolm X in as well.
Yeah,
as another person.
Sorry, Jordan. I know you're going to be mad about this.
I think it would have been a fantastic conversation. Him and MLK had very different stances towards the end of their end of their careers before they were both assassinated.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm with you, Tyler. I think the vote at this point, as great as Eleanor Roosevelt was, MLK's impact on America is too great to outvote him on this one. So he gets my vote.
I'm voting for Eleanor. One, because I'm making a bet on globalism, and therefore her being the so it's a little bit of a futures pick, but her being the first ambassador to the UN will be marked as a bigger deal as we go forward. Also, there are no rules anymore, and so I'm voting for the lower seeds because fuck you guys.
That's fair. You got John. This is America. You got to vote with your heart. You got to vote with what you think.
I'm voting with my heart on this one.
If you can at least like make a decent point to back up your vote, then it's fine.
You win,
Which
baby.
you did.
Yep.
Yeah.
And she's feminist and just fucking rad. She also was very likely not straight, which I think is an interesting component to her legacy too. And I hope becomes like more known and is viewed more positively. So, because that's not something that I was like aware of when, like in high school talking about her or whatever. But
that was definitely a reading more in college type of thing. Yeah. That's not like a high school fact. The fact that when FDR was sleeping around on her, she started basically a lifelong, continued a lifelong friendship with someone who very likely was her partner, really, her soulmate, right, her best friend, and
they had one of the really interesting components of that biography is just understanding their relationship was extremely complicated. And then you throw in FDR's polio and her taking care of him. And then she was his eyes and ears during the Great Depression. She would go out and report back to him about everything that was going on. It was a really important piece of his ability.
She used to road trip around with that same friend I was talking about. Just two women driving around in the 30s.
And she'd like go into a factory and be like, tell me about some shit. And then she'd report it back to FDR. And like that was a really big deal for him to understand what was going on. And he couldn't do it because of his health. So, like, again, that biography is great. And another reason to vote for Eleanor.
Well, Blake, who's it going to be?
I'm convinced. Eleanor. Voting for
Agent
Eleanor.
of Chaos. Let's go.
All right.
We're going to flip it.
We've got the coin.
Heads is...
Heads is Martin.
Okay.
Heads is Martin? Is that what you said?
Yeah. We'll do heads higher seed.
That's heads.
Martin advances. All right.
Okay, going forward.
All right.
All right.
I could feel your anticipation from here.
All right, so we have our 4-5 seed matchup. We have Harriet Tubman, leader of the Underground Railroad, and then we have our boy Alexander Hamilton, who I believe is best known for being a rap star.
Yeah, definitely.
Today,
maybe shooting
he probably
somebody
is,
at some point.
Getting shot by somebody at some point.
Oh yeah, because I haven't watched Hamilton, which is maybe bad. Didn't he?
Boo! What are you doing with your life?
Didn't he get shot also? Though he just didn't die, didn't they? No,
he's married.
Did Alexander Burr miss? Did he miss? I thought
no. Burr killed.
Or sorry,
Hamilton.
did Alexander Hamilton? Sorry.
No, he did shoot. If
that's
you
right.
seen
That's
the play,
the whole story. That's the whole thing. Yeah,
he threw away his shot.
Or if you've read a history book, it doesn't have to just be from the play Hamilton. I mean, I'm glad that people are following Hamilton's career.
I remember there's some
now.
drama about it.
The whole play, there's a refrain of "I will not throw away my shot," and then he throws away his shot at the end of it.
Yeah.
Wow, interesting. I haven't seen it, but it sounds like they were building up to that moment.
Yeah, it turns out it's a pretty capstone-y kind of moment.
Huh. Interesting. Yeah.
I
just want to start out and say here first that I was surprised that Hamilton was so high on the list as a fifth seed.
A fifth seed?
Yeah, I thought that Franklin might be a higher seed when I saw them both on the list.
First Treasury Secretary is pretty fucking important. Also, aide de camp to Washington during the Revolution, also pretty fucking important. So I mean, I think
it's still not even in the top 5 of my founding fathers. So
really,
yeah, him and Franklin are just outside of it. They're probably like 6. Maybe
so
that's not true. Maybe they're like 4 or 5.
No. This is a different. Stop. This is a different.
Yeah, it's a different conversation.
No. Next podcast, everybody. Next podcast.
Removed.
Kelly's top 5 founding fathers. All
right. I'm derailing us. Yeah, I apologize. Yeah, this is an interesting one because you're right. All the stuff you mentioned about Hamilton are very important. He's definitely a figure and a key player in the development of what we consider to be the federal government, right? In federal powers, what the right role of the federal government should be. His participation in Federalist Papers and the arguments that surrounded there are still stuff that we're discussing today about what the proper role of the government is. And then it's have
adjacently a founding document, Federalist Papers.
Right. Yeah, exactly. For people who haven't read them or really dove into what the Federalist Papers are, it's basically a big, long debate about whether or not the Constitution should be passed.
It's like if somebody annotated the Constitution for you. Almost.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And then on the other side, I mean, Harriet Tubman is a titanic historic figure, right? When it comes to historical figures. I mean, the fact that she was influential in leading the Underground Railroad, which is arguably one of the most important civilian-based institutions in this country, when you look at the impact that they had, not only helping people escape slavery, but also giving hope to millions of people that were still held in bondage in the 1840s and 50s. Without that, very hard to see that the type of action that happened in the 1860s, and then obviously all the issues that we've had with civil rights since then, likely doesn't happen without it.
One of the precipitating components of the Civil War is the Fugitive Slave Act, which basically forced the North to return freed slaves to their Southern owners. And the North was like, go all the way to hell and fuck yourself. And then that's part of the reason why we had the Civil War. And part of the reason why we had to have the Fugitive Slave Act is because of things like the Underground Railroad.
Right. Yeah. It's basically a peaceful guerrilla movement.
Yeah.
Is what it is.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it.
Undermining laws in the South, undermining political power in the South.
But she was also a scout during the Civil War for the North, and apparently I actually just was like, she was credited as the first female military leader to ever lead an assault for the U.S. military.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they did a raid on to free a bunch of slaves, and she led it, so she's credited to be
that I did not know.
I think that they just found her house too.
Oh yeah, right.
I saw an article about that.
There's a TV show called The Yeah, I think it's called The Railroad, right? It's about the Underground Railroad.
I know that just came out too, and I saw a little blurb about it on the interwebs that said it was definitely worth checking out, even if you've checked out other Underground Railroad content before.
Yeah.
So
I'm gonna vote for her. All props to Alexander Hamilton for deciding to be a valiant gentleman and not fire his weapon. Take one for the team.
I vote for Hamilton because Banks, basically. To put it very simply, that was he. To me, he is maybe. And Kelly, we should just have a whole podcast about this. But I think his vision of America most closely matches our current vision out of any founding father, I think. And so with that, I vote for him.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're right, and part of it is might be considered prophetic in today's society, given the fact of where capitalism has gotten us and the importance of what a centralized monetary system can do, and what central banks can do, and orderly structure of our monetary system.
And a strong federal government.
Yep. Oh, yeah, for sure. But I'm going to have to vote for Harriet Tubman on this one.
Blake Mannion. Blake Mannion's our swing vote. He's like our Justice Kennedy over here.
The guardrails keeping us there. I like it.
I'm gonna have to go with Hamilton as well. As much as I
let's go.
absolutely love
Another coin flip.
Let's go.
Can we flip a $20 bill?
And that's, I mean, don't get me wrong, I love flipping coins, but that's just my genuine.
Flip it up, man.
The Tubster.
That's funny.
Tails goes to
That's Hamilton.
Wow.
Okay.
All right.
Interesting.
All right. Let's go. Here we go.
All right. So to summarize the hero bracket, and I think we should do the villain bracket next, and then we'll move back and forth.
Yeah.
So we have an upset for the ages. We basically miracle on the bracket. Ben Franklin taking it, seed number 8 over Abraham Lincoln.
I love turkeys.
You guys are turkey.
Yeah.
Frederick Douglass lost in a valiant effort to Ida B. Wells. She moves on, so we'll have a Franklin Wells matchup coming up, and then we have Martin Luther King just edging out Eleanor Franklin on a buzzer beater.
Eleanor Roosevelt. Yes.
Yeah.
Eleanor Roosevelt, sorry. And then we have Harriet Tubman losing in another close one to Hamilton, which means we'll have MLK up against our boy Hamilton next.
Those are good ones.
Oh, yeah.
There we go.
All right, so we are going to move over to the villains bracket, which I feel like is going to be more fun.
Yeah, could be.
Number 1 seed, Robert E. Lee.
In case you didn't know, John thinks that this Civil War was important.
It was important.
It turns out.
And then the 8th seed, General. Was he a general? He was a general. Colonel. No, he was a colonel.
Yeah.
Colonel George Custer. Yes, sir. So Robert E. Lee, leader of Southern forces in the Civil War. Largely credited with making sure that war actually was prolonged. Although the history is interesting on this because there's a lot of people turning on Lee and being like, actually, he kind of sucked. But I would say the more mainstream traditional thinking is that Robert E. Lee was offered command of the Northern forces at the beginning of the war. If he had taken that, then the war probably is not very long. But because he chose the South, we ended up with a gigantic shit show. I'm actually kind of glad that you brought that up because it's one of the reasons that I immediately lean towards Lee as my vote here.
is
Oh, yeah.
because of the lasting impression that he's left on the southern states.
Yeah.
Right? The idea of a southern gentleman. He was just doing his duty. This had nothing to do with slavery. This had nothing
right.
to do with
Yeah.
politics. He
Right.
was a southern gentleman who was stepping in and doing what he had to do to support his fellow statesmen in Virginia and the other wrongful people from the southern states that were getting overly burdened by the federal government by saying you're not allowed to hold people in chattel slavery anymore.
And this is a larger component of what is called the lost cause of the South, which is a movement of rewriting the history of the Civil War. When you hear, oh, it was just, farmers protecting their houses from an overreaching federal government, and Robert E. Lee was a gentleman, like Kelly said, and you just have good people on both sides trying to do the right thing. That's the lost cause, and it's bullshit.
Good people on both sides. Wow, it's almost like I've heard that argument before.
Yeah, it's bullshit. It was about slavery. The vice president of the southern states said this is about slavery. They said it themselves. This is not some post hoc interpretation.
Dude, did you hear? Sorry, I know this is a little bit of a tangent, but did you hear the state representative in Tennessee this week
talking about the
3/5 compromise?
Yes!
Saying that the only reason that the 3/5 compromise happened is because the North wanted to make sure that the southern states couldn't allow slaves to vote. That was basically his argument.
It was to, at least my understanding, it was to diminish Southern power.
Wow.
Yep, diminish Southern power. So the North forced the 3/5 compromise on the South, which is like, wow, that's a very selective, weird way to think about the history. It's the opposite
of what happened. It was about Southern power.
Yeah, yeah.
They didn't want to. The assumption there is that they all assumed that slaves were going to count towards representation as a full person.
Yeah,
and they argued it down to 3/5. It's the opposite. The assumption, especially from the South, was that slaves were going to count as 0 because they didn't view them as humans, and then we were able to bargain up to 3/5.
Right. That's how the 3/5. It wasn't a bargain down; it was a bargain up. Sorry, I know that it was that was an off thing, but that was so ridiculous that I had to bring it up.
Yeah. Great aside, because I mean, it's another one of those lost cause bullshit. It's like, no, you're the bad guy. Sorry, that whole are we the baddies? You are. You're the baddies.
Yeah. And in this matchup,
is it? Sorry, go ahead, Tyler.
I was like, well, in this matchup, George Custer, also a piece of shit.
Let's give him his due.
Yeah, also a piece of shit. Slaughtered many indigenous people.
With glee,
and women and children didn't have to. Total shithead. I'm still probably going to vote for Robert E. Lee just because I think the magnitude of. I mean, it's hard to say, but just the magnitude of violence and killing that he was in charge of. George Custer was a colonel. So he was shitty, but
let's be clear. He's a colonel in the Union Army.
Yeah.
All right.
Yes.
So he's a colonel from the Northern Army that after the war was sent west to fight,
I think he was on
Native American tribes.
I think Custer was on McClellan's staff. There's actually a great story. So McClellan was a doddering fool. And the general staff gets up to a river and they're all debating about how deep it is and how to figure it out and whatever. And George Custer just charges his horse into the middle of the river and says, "General, it is this deep." And I, despite the fact that George Custer is a huge fucking douchebag, I do really appreciate the fact that he embarrassed George McClellan, because George McClellan actually should be on this fucking list as a villain, but a doddering, stupid moron villain.
Fair. All right, so I go for Lee. I go for Robert E. Lee.
Blake, what do you think?
Yeah, Blake.
I can't go for Lee because it's bad blood. It's literally my family. So
that's another podcast. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My
direct descendant is your great grandfather.
My great grandfather was General George Pickett.
I think I knew that.
Charge.
Yeah. Wow.
That's what I thought. I didn't think it was related to Lee. Yeah, go ahead.
No, but Lee is largely responsible for ordering that charge.
He is entirely responsible for it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, Pickett didn't want to do it, and Lee was like, "Nope, it's going to happen," and it happened, and it was a slaughter. So
Longstreet didn't want to do it either.
Yeah, shouldn't you vote for him because of it?
Yeah. I'm like,
this is the biggest villain. We're not picking out who is nicer here. We're picking out the bigger asshole here.
I got you. Okay, well then, definitely then I got to vote for Lee.
Yeah,
All right, it's unanimous. Robert E. Lee.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right.
Okay.
There we go.
All right, Lee moves on. All right, number 2.
I don't want him. But I don't want him to be like the winner of the game. That's my fear.
Who knows? It could go that way. It actually might be fitting.
Well, especially because we knocked our number 1 seed off the board, and now the villain bracket is wide open.
It actually would be very apropos of history if a villain won the entire thing.
If who did? Lee did?
Just a villain. Somebody
villain.
From the villain side won the entire
it
thing.
probably
It's very apropos
honestly makes sense historically. Anyways, that's another podcast. We have a second seed, Nathan Bedford Forrest, also of Civil War ilk, but also the KKK. So he's got some shit covered. Versus Curtis Lemay. People may not have heard of Curtis Lemay, but he is responsible for in the list of like deaths responsible for in the 20th century. It's like Hitler, Stalin, Lemay. It is wild how many deaths he's responsible for.
Some might say, FDR, since he was the president at the time.
But
I get what you're saying.
If he
was responsible for the
transitive property,
fire bombings of Japan.
Yeah.
So
slaughter.
Yeah, for those who don't know, they especially Tokyo, but all over, they decided the Bomber Command in the Pacific decided to not only drop nukes but to destroy with what was essentially napalm entire cities of Japan. I believe, if my numbers are correct, 90,000 people died in the firebombing of Tokyo. More people died in the firebombing of Tokyo than they did in Nagasaki or Hiroshima. It was and they knew what they were doing. They were like, hey, those houses are built with paper, and so we're going to burn them all fucking down. Also, he was George Wallace's running mate in 1968. So he too, like Nathan Bedford Forrest, has a whole lot of shit covered in terms of being a shitty fucking human. I also would really recommend Malcolm Gladwell's podcast, Revisionist History. And then he does a 4-part series on Curtis Lemay. And then he has a book that is out or coming out called The Bomber Mafia, of which Curtis Lemay was the most famous member. And
that sounds fascinating. Definitely got to put that on the list.
And you know what's really cool about it is that it's an it's a book. I think it's a book, but he made it specifically as an audiobook. So
book and audiobook. Interesting.
Well, indeed. The interviews are not like a narrator reading them. They're the actual archival interviews that he like puts in there. And so it's a really like interesting way of maybe advancing the audiobook medium. So all the way recommended. And also it's important for us to know who Curtis Lemay was, because he is a tremendous villain in American history that not a lot of people know about.
Yeah. That's actually
good. So you're voting for Lemay. Is that what you're saying?
No, I mean, Nathan Bedford Forrest also was responsible for
first Grand Wizard of the KKK, right?
Yeah. Right.
Well, and extending the Civil War. He was Shelby Foote, who wrote he was an amateur historian, but wrote like maybe the most famous narrative. Well, it's a competitive category, but wrote a very famous narrative of the Civil War. He said there were 2 geniuses that came out of the Civil War: Abraham Lincoln, who we voted off already, and Nathan Bedford Forrest. And he was a absolutely brilliant general. He was a cavalry general in the West. The West was a possibly, and this is hotly debated, but a possibly more decisive theater of the war than the Eastern Front was, and so he too was responsible for a whole lot of shit in the Civil War. And then, like Tyler said, first Grand Wizard of the KKK, pretty fucking shitty legacy in American history.
The reason basically that like Birth of a Nation ended up being made, first ever movie played at the White House in the early 1910s. It's a legacy. It's the the opposite side, right, of what, in my opinion, what Robert E. Lee signifies as like the gentleman Southernly person, right,
Yeah.
that did it for duty and honor. Bedford was like a white supremacist, and it was like, this is as much as they say about state rights, it is definitely about slavery. It's about us being superior and making sure that our people are taken care of, and that's the exact reason why the KKK was born out of it and why he was the first Grand Wizard. It's hard to vote against him in this one, given the real lasting impact.
Exactly. I think I'm going to vote for him because if we're talking about like the impact on American history, Curtis Lemay obviously has some shit, and we can talk about the fallout in terms of like globalism and all of that. And obviously very bad, but I'm going to go with, the continued legacy of white supremacy that was for so much bullshit.
Unfortunately, Lemay helped us win the war in World War II, and that's something that we as a society need to come to terms with and be more acceptance of the atrocities that we committed World War II, the atrocities we committed in Vietnam afterwards, the atrocities that we've continued to commit around the planet. That's something that we need to deal with. But yeah, Lemay ended up, that bombing campaign was a very important piece of why World War II ended the way that it did. And so the power that the United States has currently is based on that and based on his villainy in a way. But it's not just him. That's another thing here too that I think helps me vote for Bedford instead, is that I think Lemay is also part of a larger structure in the military of the United States during World War II, and he wasn't the only one responsible for making all those decisions on his own.
And as a running mate for George Wallace, I think you can make a decent argument that Curtis Lemay is an inheritor of a tradition that was largely created by Nathan Bedford Forrest, right?
I think that's actually a pretty good point. Yeah.
And so, like there's kind of like one derives the other. So one is obviously more important than the other. Blake, what do you say?
As cool as it was that LeMay is being accredited with bringing life into the martial art judo, I think that I'm gonna have to go with Mr. Nathan Bedford.
It is again unanimous.
All right.
NBF advances. Oh man, so we're gonna have a Lee versus NBF matchup next. That's hardcore. All right, next we have Joseph.
Again, can you tell which era of history John's most interested in? Which one he thinks most important? Sorry, go ahead.
I mean, is there another one you would put as number? I mean, I guess 2 is definitely debatable, but I don't know who more. I mean, I thought about Jefferson Davis, but like, or I guess you could.
He's not. I don't think he's as important to the South as either of those two.
Yeah. You could also like do a hipster argument and put like George Washington.
What, like on the villain side?
As a villain, as a villain, and be like, America's bad.
I mean, you could do that with some of the heroes that we had. On the other side.
No,
so
totally.
History's not black and white.
Seed number 3, Joseph McCarthy, senator from Wisconsin, leader of the Red Scare.
The coolest committees ever to be made in the House.
The Committee on Un-American Affairs, HUAC, who Bobby Kennedy worked for, which was unfortunate. Up against Andrew Jackson, our 7th president.
Stellar dude.
Famous for the nullification crisis. Famous for the Trail of Tears.
Yeah.
Famous for just being a douchebag generally.
Famous for hating on Alexander Hamilton's idea of a centralized bank.
Yes, which is
but in the
very
1820s.
frustrating. It's very wrong. It was a bad idea that he had. So he's a 6th seed. I actually, in retrospect, might have reversed this seeding here. But anyway,
I was gonna say, when I saw that this afternoon, I immediately went with the underdog pick in this one because I think Jackson's a much more larger figure in the history of the United States. I think that exactly his anti-federal government and pro-Southern slavery stance And when you combine that with really the horrific things that he thought about the indigenous population and the Trail of Tears and forced removal that he kind of masterminded in a way, but definitely pushed forward and made sure that it happened in a lot of states in the South, puts him in, at the top, gives him my vote. I mean, fuck Joseph McCarthy. The whole idea that somebody who wants to do free speech and talk about communism as an idea should get pushed out of any, like, it's a more extreme idea of like a cancel culture than what you're seeing today. Like conservatives bitch about cancel culture today, and it's like, do you understand what the right did in the 1950s with Joseph McCarthy? Like,
they straight up canceled people's lives. Like that was wild shit. That's such a good point, dude.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to go with Andrew Jackson, although I think McCarthy, you could say, I think also like the lasting effects of just like some of the things like, that's communism, that's socialism, like that's totalitarianism is what you're describing. It's actually none of those things. And Joseph McCarthy is very responsible for a lot of that, I feel like. But Andrew Jackson just, the
it's like
that he committed.
The idea that we cleared like McCarthy out of the American idealism when people finally were like, okay, now you've gone too far after 4 or 5 years of the stuff that he was pulling on the national scene, and that somehow just like pumped the brakes on everything. It's exactly what you see in the far right now with Trump, where it's like, well, you got him out and it's totally fine. You just pump the brakes on it, man. It's good.
But lasting effects.
Ideas last. Those are the same ideas from the 50s that are being regurgitated now on the right. It's what you see. People are un-American on the left. It's un-American for people to be on the left, basically, for a lot of people that are Trump supporters.
Right.
You bet.
Blake, what do you think?
Man, I'm going to have to go with Joseph McCarthy as well.
All right.
It's just because we're still I feel like we're still dealing with his bullshit more right now.
Sure. I vote for Jackson. You had me a Trail of Tears.
Yeah.
That's it.
That was enough. That was enough for me. Yep.
All right.
Plus the states' rights, anti-federalism shit, like that bothers me. That's one reason I don't like Jefferson, and one reason I do like Hamilton. Like Henry Clay was badass because he believed in internal improvements and a role for the federal government. And then Lincoln is an inheritor of the Hamilton Clay tradition. And I see that throughout American history, that like we should have a robust investment in ourselves. And Jackson was not that. Jackson was an inheritor of the Jeffersonian tradition, which is bothersome to me.
Right. Yeah. The yeoman farmer, individual liberty, and also a firm believer in the Monroe Doctrine, which was, we're not doing anything outside of our borders. The only thing that matters is making sure that American people are prosperous. Also weird. It sounds like that's another theme that pops up often.
Turns out isolationism. All right. So our 4th seed versus 5th seed, we have Bull Connor, the Commissioner of Public Safety for Birmingham. He is, I would say, kind of like an avatar. We could have put George Wallace here too as an avatar of like the backlash against the civil rights movement.
Strom Thurmond.
He is,
could have been this,
or Strom Thurmond, indeed. Yep.
Just pick your slew of Dixiecrat Democrats from the South.
Any newsreel footage you've seen of protesters in the South getting knocked over by fire hoses or attacked by dogs is probably from Birmingham in 1963, by way of Bull Connor's orders. So he was really famous in that action. Then you have the 5th seed, Rutherford B. Hayes, who we will all remember as the beneficiary of the corrupt bargain of 1876, which I guess, as we've seen as a theme, it was important because it ended Reconstruction.
Yeah.
Again, Civil War shout out.
Civil War shout out.
I will make the case that it is the most important event in American history.
Yeah,
but the corrupt bargain in the end of Reconstruction is a very, very key important part of how the early 20th century worked, all the way up until the civil rights movement that we're still dealing with today. because
Yes.
the 60s would not have needed to happen had the federal government continued to say, no, you're not allowed to put in Jim Crow laws. No, you're not allowed to forcefully and violently stop African Americans from owning the land we gave them as reparations for being slaves.
All of the voter suppression that we're dealing with right now is it started after the corrupt bargain of 1876 and the end of Reconstruction. Like they say that the North won the war, but the South won the peace. And a lot of
100%. No doubt about that.
A whole lot of shit that we deal with today is because of the events of not the Civil War, but the Reconstruction after Civil War. And the fact that we lost that is largely because Rutherford B. Hayes, there was a contested presidential election in 1876. It went to the House of Representatives. Rutherford B. Hayes says, hey, guys from the South, vote for me, and I'll pull some of those troops out of the South, which the North still had.
And he did.
Exactly, and that ended Reconstruction. And if you go back and look at Reconstruction, there was a much higher black voting share than you would expect. There were black representatives. Like it was working, and then the corrupt bargain happened, and then
dude, you're seeing it now in the last 15 years.
You are seeing it now,
where you're seeing communities where you have a higher proportion of African Americans getting their first seats again in those districts, and it hasn't been since fucking 1869.
Exactly. You hear a lot of like the first black senator from yada yada since 1874, and the reason is because that was when Reconstruction was actually working, and we abandoned it too early.
I will be voting for Rutherford B. Hayes. I am old school hating Rutherford B. Hayes. I will actually probably be
Tyler.
I think that's not the first.
I know you are.
I don't think it's the first time I've said that phrase on this podcast that I'm old school hating Rutherford B. Hayes. I will actually probably be looking at these names. I will probably be voting Rutherford B. Hayes all the way through as a villain. And I also will just quote America the book here, the Daily Show book, that Rutherford B. Hayes is a taint on the presidency, not so much as the definition of a taint as the discoloration, but as the actual anatomic place between the ball sack and the anus. That, my friends.
Thank you, Daily Show writing staff. Love it.
That's right. That's my vote.
That's fair. That's fair.
Hayes gets my vote for sure.
Yeah, I too am old school hating Rutherford B. Hayes, and I too will be voting for Rutherford B. Hayes.
I'm going as well.
Yeah.
All right, it's unanimous.
A sweep. That's a sweep. A lot less debate on the villain
contention.
side.
Yeah,
a lot less contention at the end.
Definitely.
All right, we're popping back over the hero side. Our boy, our hero, first in our hearts. Well, actually, eighth in our hearts, but Ben Franklin up against our girl, Ida B. Wells. How we all feeling?
I'm probably going to go with Ida B. Wells here on this one because I do think that had it been Abraham Lincoln, it might be different. But
also, I'm glad that we don't have to pick between Abraham Lincoln and Ida B. Wells.
Yeah, that would not be.
That's true.
Yeah, that would.
To be honest, or Frederick Douglass for that matter.
Yeah,
it's tougher for 4 white guys to sit around and go, "Fuck yeah, Abraham Lincoln! So much better in American history than these African Americans that matter to their communities."
I can safely say that Ben Franklin, other than
smoking marijuana, which is apparently the most important thing in American history,
and getting a bunch of shout outs by rappers. I think other than that, I think that his influence has a little bit, impact is maybe not so much as Ida B. Wells.
I think it's waned for sure.
It's waned a little bit, so I'm going to go with Ida B. Wells.
Yeah, I agree with you, Tyler. In this matchup, I'm going to have to go with Ida B. Wells too. I think where she stands just has much more influence on the 20th century of American history than Franklin's entire influence on the history of our country does. So I got to go with Wells.
For me, it's going to boil down to the fact that Benjamin Franklin was a slave owner. So,
ooh,
yeah, buddy.
All right.
Also true.
So
Wells moves on. Look at that. Oh man, into the
John,
into the
who are you going to vote for?
I vote Wells as well.
Okay. You didn't want to try to push the 8th seat after he upset
no.
Lincoln. You didn't want to try to convince us.
I mean, aside from just the the burning hatred by which I voted against Benjamin Franklin, I do think Ida B. Wells has a bigger impact than Benjamin Franklin, legitimately, because the NAACP turns out is really fucking important. All right, now this one I think is going to be a tough one.
Yeah.
Martin Luther King Jr. up against Alexander Hamilton. We have the soul of America up against the pocketbook of America.
Yeah, well, I'm an
Maybe, if you
anti-capitalist, so
will.
there's only one answer for that. I don't know. Yeah. Am I a real anti-capitalist? That's a little bit of a strong statement. It's a little more murky for me, listeners, if you really care about the definition. Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, again, it's like both of them, like there's a lot of bedrocks that have been set by both of them also, right? Like I think we could say, and things that are going off of. So I lean MLK just because his legacy is so alive right now, but that's also like particular to this moment. So I guess,
but you can't take that out of context.
Yeah.
Oh, right. It's like,
well, I just so like we should note I did not include Trump here because we just haven't had enough time.
Right.
Yeah, I'm glad you didn't.
No,
honestly.
we didn't need to do that. Yeah. And like again, we don't know what his legacy is going to be necessarily.
Yeah.
Right. He's still alive.
I mean, it's a year after his presidency. There's no way we can understand. I mean, there's a great apocryphal story about Zhou Enlai, who was the number 2 to Mao Zedong in China, was at the one of the peace conferences for Vietnam, and someone asked him, "What do you think about the French Revolution?" And he said, "It's too early to tell."
Fair, yeah,
yeah. Which it's an apocryphal story, but it's one of those apocryphal stories that you just let's just say it's true because it tells the truth, which is history is really hard to tell, especially if it's near.
It's also, I think it's also helps your point because I'm pretty positive, John, you're going to vote for Hamilton here. That the lasting impact over the last 250 years, 280 years at this point, is his idea about, structured federal government, strong purchasing power, a centralized way to pay for stuff, a single monetary unit. Without that, the United States would have failed, and it would have failed many times. There would be no such thing as a union. The reason that I am going to vote for Martin Luther King is the opposite, which is the quote that you said from Mao Zedong's second, which is that it's still too early to tell. We're still living through the American experiment. And while Hamilton, his ideas has helped us got here, I think MLK is more important to where we are as a society currently.
So almost a futures pick again.
I guess it's a little bit of a futures pick, but it's also, I think there's more. We're all social creatures, and democracy is a social game that we all play with each other to allow us to come together and have some kind of agreement on how we're going to govern ourselves and how we're going to live with each other. And I think that Martin Luther King's views and his work in the civil rights movement is more important to where we are currently than the underlying foundations of the monetary system and the federal government power.
One of my favorite quotes just generally is Martin Luther King. We all came over in different ships, but we're in the same boat now.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Kelly,
So
you have actually convinced me. I was going to vote for Hamilton, but I very much like the argument you laid out about the futures, especially like I think Hamilton maybe is more important to the survival to date. But I think he has diminishing returns going forward and much more diminishing returns going forward compared to Martin Luther King, because as technology advances, we get closer to what Marx would actually call capitalism, which is the elimination of scarce resources. And as that happens, Hamilton is going to become less important in his thoughts, and Martin Luther King Jr. will become more important in how our species survives. And with climate change and nuclear warfare and I don't know, pandemics maybe. And so I will be changing my vote to Martin.
All right.
What?
I'm
amazed. I'm amazed. I didn't think that I was going to change.
It was a good argument.
Good job.
Yeah.
Good job. Blake?
Yeah, that's impressive. It's hands down MLK. And because Alexander Hamilton, apparently there's new information now as of last year that he was probably a slave owner and involved with buying and selling of slaves.
Very good chance. Yep.
So I'm going to have to
As a good portion
MLK.
of our founding fathers were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, moving over back to the villain side.
Yeah, back to the dark side. What?
We have our this is the quarter or the semifinals. We're determining who's gonna go to the what should we call this? the Washington Cup. Or like
the Freedom Cup.
These are the
I don't know.
The Freedom
Let's
Cup.
not call it the Freedom Cup because if a villain
No,
wins, then I'm gonna feel real
right,
bad.
right. I think it's tough if a villain wins, but I feel like we should call it like the Sitting Bull Cup or something like that. We don't have enough indigenous representation on the bracket, so maybe we like name the cup after them. Anyway,
We'll just call it.
I don't like that idea.
We'll just call it game of
veto
brackets
that.
for now.
no.
The
Okay.
Game of
games.
brackets.
We'll have to come
Game
up
of
with
brackets.
All right. Well, we have number 1 seed Robert E. Lee versus number 2 seed Nathan Bedford Forrest.
I think again you're looking at futures versus diminishing returns, and I think it's difficult actually on that one. But I think, I might go with because it's even in that context it's difficult. But maybe Nathan Bedford Forrest, just because again, like the lasting impacts of the KKK and white supremacy.
I would say the Lee does not need Nathan Bedford Forrest to be terrible to America, but Nathan Bedford Forrest does need Robert E. Lee
That's a good point.
in terms of their ability to, perform terrible actions. So I will be voting for Lee.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I see that argument, John. I'm gonna vote for Forrest because I agree with Tyler. I think that the lasting idealism, right, of white supremacy and racism in the South is largely more on his shoulders than it is on Lee's shoulders. I agree that Forrest wouldn't had the opportunity to end up being who he was in the long run and what he did after the war without Lee and what Lee did. But that sentiment that Forrest represents was still there in the South, right? And I think even if he wasn't the figure, there would have been somebody else. And so I vote for him because I think that the sentiment that he represents is more impactful.
Balake?
Balake, what do you think?
I'm definitely gonna have to go with Nathan Bedford Forrest.
Wow. All right.
Upset again.
Those first
in
seeds
the
getting out of
seeds
there.
out.
F.
Get him
All
out.
right. Andrew Jackson versus Rutherford B. Hayes. We know what Tyler's voting for.
Rutherford B. Hayes all the way to the end, baby. All the way to the end.
Also, the only time in this bracket we're going to have two presidents go against each other.
Yeah,
might say.
right.
If we were really going to do like most important, it would have just been a list of presidents
Right.
mostly. So like,
Yeah, I almost suggested that as one of the other things. We could just do a bracket of presidents.
we could,
at
but
some
like,
point. But yeah,
What do people think? What do you think?
I mean,
we already know
I think
who Tyler's
Reconstruction
voting
is really bad. It's really, really bad. Like it's so fucking bad,
So bad.
that I think I'm voting for Rutherford B. Hayes.
for. Yeah, I'm leaning towards Hayes too. I think that the symbol that Jackson was and what he stood for, in terms of he didn't say it this way, but looking back, you can look at it as kind of a racial purity doctrine, right? Fully supported slavery, wanted to get indigenous peoples out of the way to make sure that whites were prosperous, paved the way for what the South was going to be in the 1840s. Without that in the White House, there probably would have been that same type of progression. It may not have been as quickly. But the corrupt bargain by Hayes is too much. So he gets my vote.
There it is. Blake, it's already going to Hayes, but what do you think?
Yeah, no, I'm Hayes as well.
Hayes as well.
All right.
Boom. Semifinals and Hero
Semifinals. Ida B. Wells versus Martin Luther King.
So very difficult, right? And I will say, because patriarchy, I don't know as much about Ida B. Wells as I know about MLK. So I'm just going to name that right now. I recently read, because I was like realizing this about myself, the autobiography for Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks did a bunch of other shit than just sit in the bus. Everybody.
Yeah, tons of other shit. They're like, she was a seamstress. It's like, get the fuck out of here.
Yeah. And there's a whole story of like why that happened. Like, a woman, she needs to be like a dainty seamstress. Like, actually, she was a pretty powerful, badass woman who was like, I'm not going to get the fuck up and go fuck yourself. And then did a bunch of other shit. But I think I'm going to vote for MLK because, and maybe this is also, I mean, in Ida B. Wells' organizing, I don't know, but where he was going with his movement is where this is like a futures pick of where I hope that our current social justice move is going. People were like, oh, like, you know, the powers that be, or if you want to talk about like whatever is really threatening, you know, the people behind the curtain, if you believe in that sort of thing. It was all well and good while he was just getting white people and black people just like, you know, do that. But then when he was like, no, I'm actually going to build a multiracial movement against the owning class of workers. Soon after that happened, he was assassinated. Interesting. And that is the place where that is like where the majority of us can all come together is against the fucking 1%. And so I'm going to vote for MLK.
That's fair. Yep, that's totally fair. Yeah, it's a tough one for me too, but I think I got to give the edge. I think actually pretty clearly in my mind is to Martin Luther King Jr. in this one. Ida B. Wells is a very important person, but yeah, it's hard. As our listeners may not know this, but I have a graduate degree in 20th century history focused on the United States, and it's hard to understate how radical Martin Luther King was to a lot of people in the United States, right? I know we had talked about it earlier, like maybe including Malcolm X, who was seen as way more radical, right? Kind of started the idea of the Black Panther movement, of a more military idealism of how you're going to push against white oppression in black communities. Martin Luther King just saying that we need to have sit-ins, we need to do this peacefully, was so much more radical at the beginning of it than people give it credit for now. People who don't understand how really, truly radical that was in the 60s. And he's not the only figurehead. It's because that history provided him the opportunity, especially during the March on Washington, to give the I Have a Dream speech, which if we had a brackets of best speeches ever made, that might be a number one seed that wins out in that one. But
that's a good idea as best speeches.
Yeah,
that's a good bracket idea.
It's so hard. When it comes down to just two people, it's so hard in this moment to vote against Martin Luther King. So yeah, he's got to be my pick in this one.
I concur.
All right.
Those are good reasons, Kelly. I'm gonna go with MLK too, and because I feel like his time was cut short, and like Ida Wells did a bunch of stuff, but if she was assassinated at 39, she wouldn't have been able to accomplish a bunch of other things. So for that reason alone, I'm going to say MLK because he got the short stick.
Underrated speech of his would be his Nobel Peace Prize speech. It's really good. I like it a lot. It talks about making sure that our technological advancements does not outpace our moral advances, which I think is extremely relevant for right now.
Yeah, how prophetic is that? Jeez,
it's kind of wild to in parts. It's an extremely modern speech. So I'd highly recommend it. I also, as an interesting little thought, an interesting juxtaposition, is watch that and then watch Barack Obama's Nobel Peace Prize speech back to back, because Obama makes the argument for war, which is interesting. I think in part because he was fucking mad that he got
Yeah,
the Nobel
yeah,
Peace
yeah, I
Prize.
think
Which is understandable because he was like, hey, congratulations, you're not George Bush. Here's a Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
And he's like, great,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
makes my domestic politics harder, which makes all the things you want me to accomplish more difficult.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
thanks, guys.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's
I think
another...
we're talking ourselves into a bracket of best speeches.
Yeah,
right now.
I like that.
right.
Yeah, no, I really like that. I would have, yeah. All right, so MLK advances to the finals.
Yeah. Side note on the MLK assassination: Malcolm X was assassinated when he was, black separatist. Then he went to Mecca and he saw like people of all different races all worshiping, and he had like this epiphany moment where he realized that like it would be much more powerful if people all came together against something. And then he went back to the United States and started talking about that, and then he also got assassinated. So interesting, similar circumstances
Weird how that
under
works
which
out.
they had a different, like, I thought they were moving to bring a lot of unifying, and then they were killed. So, anyways, make meaning of that what you will, listeners.
It meant that they were going to be more powerful movements.
Yeah,
And there's going to be less control by a white government.
Yeah. Anyways,
That's what it is. Go ahead.
Villain semifinals.
Nathan Bedford Forrest versus Rutherford B. Hayes.
There's only one way I could vote in this.
I would have a difficult choice if it was Lee. I don't think it's difficult against Nathan Bedford Forrest with Rutherford B. Hayes, and I think it's very clear against Nathan Bedford Forrest that it's Rutherford B. Hayes. Rutherford B. Hayes is like the Hulk version to Bruce Banner's Nathan Bedford Forrest.
Yeah.
If you want to talk about like perpetuating white supremacy.
Dude, see, I was gonna pull like a totally different superhero villain type of analogy here, where it's more like a maybe I can't make a great one-to-one, but the reason that Hayes is so much worse is that they both influenced a lot of violence and a lot of policy that pushed through until the 20th century and that we're still dealing with today. And Hayes did it because of power reasons and for personal privilege reasons, that he signed off millions of people in the South to their fate. And so fuck him for that. He deserves to be voted for in this category.
Blake?
Hayes.
All right.
Definitely.
Yep. I mean,
All right.
I hate him so much. Here we go.
Martin Luther King versus Rutherford B. Hayes.
What a great,
How did we decide
matchup
that?
we have come to here in the end.
So
Actually
what we
agree.
have decided is that the central issue in America is white supremacy.
Which-
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the way that this was set up, it forced us a little bit into that conversation more than other things.
Yeah.
God, this is a tough one because I don't want a villain to come out on top.
Listen.
But in terms of influence on American history,
I'm making a
it's still
futures
hard.
pick. I'm making a futures pick.
Yes.
But I'm going to vote for MLK because I want him on top at the end of the day.
Yeah. Here's the thing. Listen, the world is a wonky place and is progress real and all of that. But where we are right now, it seems that if these two people's influence was like, the end of Reconstruction and Jim Crow versus MLK, it appears that MLK is winning that battle, that right there.
At this point,
and that is the trajectory.
Especially with the younger generations in this country.
Yes.
It's a lot less racism.
Yes.
There's a lot. People in our generation and younger are trying to continue to really fight against structural racism, which is a long-lasting thing from Jim Crow. Not only Jim Crow, but just communities around the country at that point. But
Like, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm definitely going to vote for MLK, although I would like to try and tie this up so we could do the coin toss.
leave it to chance.
But piggybacking on your comment about the youth, I definitely have noticed that they're much less apathetic and engaged, I guess, much more engaged. So that's really nice to see. On the futures note, I think that the BLM side of things, the movement is winning, and I hope that it continues to sway that way. So.
The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And I will be voting for Martin Luther King Jr. for that reason. He is the winner of our American bracket.
Unanimous.
Unanimous winner,
Hell yeah.
and we love that.
Yeah. That was a
I
great
also,
game.
the irony's not lost on me that I just said hell yeah, even though he was a Christian minister. So,
God,
yeah.
well,
Not bad.
not bad,
Yeah.
not bad. We're down to play again. More, we could, have so many other things in there. We could do this one again with different people. Maybe Abraham Lincoln got to get another shot
Yeah.
at it.
So, on that note, listeners, please leave us a comment. Let us know if you liked this bracket game of brackets, and we will continue doing them if so.
Godspeed, everybody.
I can safely say that Ben Franklin, other than
Smoking marijuana, which is
Smoking
apparently
marijuana
the most
and-
important thing in American history.
and getting a bunch of shout outs by rappers